After being beheaded, Anne Boleyn's head might stay aware for about 30 seconds. In that horrifying half-minute, eyes might blink, lips might try to speak, and consciousness fades slowly. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of England's King Henry VIII, and one of history's most famous queens to be executed, likely experienced this. While history often skips these grim details, Anne's final moments show she suffered intense mental torture, far worse than just the act of execution. Her death highlights the cruelty of Tudor justice, where executions were designed to humiliate victims completely. Though many books just say she was beheaded for treason, her last days involved a deliberate and severe mental breakdown, planned so carefully it would shock even modern experts. Her execution wasn't just an end, it was the final step in Henry VIII's campaign to destroy a woman who had become too powerful for him. By May 19th, 1536, Anne had been locked in the Tower of London for 17 days, the same place where, just 3 years earlier, she had prepared to be crowned queen in a grand ceremony. Facing death, she was trapped in a terrible waiting game as Henry delayed her execution, prolonging her fear. He even brought in an expert swordsman from France instead of using the usual axe. This is sometimes seen as an act of mercy, but it really made the event even more dramatic. Despite this, witnesses reported Anne showed remarkable calm and even cheerfulness as she prepared to die. A psychologist might see this as dissociation, a mental defense caused by deep trauma. Anne reportedly joked darkly, calling herself une sainte, or headless, showing hidden pain. History often ignores her terror, knowing false claims. Adultery, incest, plotting to kill the king were ruining her name. What makes Anne Boleyn's death so disturbing isn't just the beheading, but the planned erasure of who she was. Henry VIII didn't just want her dead, he wanted her gone from history, her achievements ignored, her daughter Elizabeth's right to rule denied. The execution ended a smear campaign to make England believe their once-loved queen deserved it. Before death, she faced outrageous lies about her being immoral, claims too wild for any modern court. London was strangely bright on May 19th, opposite to the horror coming. Anne prayed her last night but couldn't sleep. Tower records say she asked for the sacrament at 2 a.m, kneeling before it for hours. By dawn, she'd been awake nearly 24 hours, her mind likely broken by stress and tiredness. When the Tower lieutenant called her, she was laughing with her ladies, a sign not of calm but of a mind breaking down. Her execution had been delayed and rescheduled many times, a common but overlooked torture. Not knowing when death would come was used on purpose. Told her time had come, Anne was led from her rooms down halls she walked as queen just 3 years earlier. Guards who once protected her now stopped her escaping. Courtiers who once bowed watched her last walk coldly. The scaffold on Tower Green was built unusually low, only 3 feet high, not like the tall ones in films. This meant Anne took just a few steps up, robbing her of a queen's height and putting her close to the mocking crowd. History says a loud, festive mood was encouraged, not the quiet respect often shown. It was a public show, warning those who defied the king, especially women who rose too high. Before kneeling at the block, Anne gave a final speech, not from mercy, but because custom demanded it. Her words, chosen carefully, showed her political skill and desperate state. "Good people, I have come here to die. For according to the law, I am condemned to die, and so I will say nothing against it." This seeming acceptance was her last act of rebellion. By agreeing with the law, but not confessing guilt, she quietly questioned the charges.
Perhaps most unsettling was the king's absence. Unlike other royal executions, Henry VIII didn't attend. He waited at Whitehall Palace for news of her death. While a sword took her life, Henry reportedly celebrated his coming marriage to Jane Seymour, showing how completely Anne was cast aside. Personal issues became political. Anne's death was a needed step for the king's son. The swordsman hired from Calais, paid well for his skill, added planned cruelty. English beheadings often took many axe swings, but this Frenchman could do it in one stroke. A stranger to Anne, in her last moments she died by a foreign hand, a final insult to a queen who once charmed England. Blindfolding, often seen as mercy to spare her seeing the sword, had a practical use, stopping her moving and ruining the cut. Unlike common belief, Anne knelt upright, not putting her head on a block. a French custom making the killer's job harder. She had to stay perfectly still by willpower as the swordsman readied his blow. Witnesses said her lips moved in prayer, her eyes darting under the blindfold, trying to hear the blade coming. Not knowing when death would strike was a hidden torture. Many cleaned-up history books say the beheading was tidy for Tudor times, one stroke taking Anne's head. But what happened next is often left out. Witnesses claim her eyes and mouth twitched for seconds after, a shocking body reaction when brain tissue still has oxygen. Some even report her lips formed words, maybe finishing a prayer cut off by the sword. This awful sight made some witnesses faint. Others turned away sickened by this grim sign of how body and spirit connect. Perhaps most tellingly, no proper coffin was ready. Her ladies, overcome by grief and shock, had to quickly find a chest for her head and body. This small oversight shows the total lack of care for Anne's dignity. Even dead, she was an afterthought, a fixed political problem, not a person owed basic funeral rites. Anne was buried fast in a plain grave in the Tower Chapel, skipping a proper Christian funeral. The king seemed to want her memory gone as fast as her life. The Queen's wish to erase Anne went beyond death. Court painters were ordered to destroy her pictures, her royal symbols were cut from palace walls, courtiers learned saying her name risked the king's anger. While we focus on the killing, this removal of Anne's existence was violence after death, trying to kill not just a person but her legacy. Historians wouldn't start rebuilding Anne's life from what Henry's purge left for centuries.
Anne's execution also scarred those who saw it, especially her ladies who had to clean and prepare her head for burial. These women, afraid of being linked to the Queen's supposed crimes, had to do this terrible job while staying calm. Many reportedly had nightmares for years. At least one later joined a convent, unable to stay at court after what she saw. The impact of this mental pain was wide, casting fear over Henry's court for the rest of his reign. Right after the execution, Anne's daughter Elizabeth, not yet 3, was declared a bastard and removed from the line to the throne. This child, who'd become England's greatest queen, was abandoned, her mother killed, her father saying she wasn't his true child. Court papers show Elizabeth suddenly had no proper clothes or servants. Her household was broken up fast. This cruel treatment of the child, with Anne's death, shows another horror of her end. Her innocent child paid the price. Modern shows about Tudor executions rarely show the strong feel of it. The scaffold would have been soaked in blood from earlier deaths and full of flies in the May heat. The crowd's noise, planned by people told to cheer the Queen's death, made a wall of sound to confuse and scare. As Anne neared Tower Green, she would have heard this roar grow, with shouts and insults from people told she was a witch and adulteress. This planned public shame was key to Tudor justice. Death alone wasn't enough. Pop culture often shows Anne's last speech as noble defiance, but history suggests a harder truth. Anne Boleyn's carefully made speech, praising the king as kind, reflected her trapped position. Facing death, she couldn't speak freely. Her words were limited by fear for her daughter's future and the watching crowd. Her speech wasn't free expression, but its opposite. The final silencing of a woman who knew even her last words would reach the king and hurt those left behind. The French sword that killed Anne showed the staged nature of her death. Henry worked hard to create the right show for a queen's fall. The killer, it's said, had practiced on animals to get the single clean stroke that earned his high pay. This cold skill, turning Anne's death into a technical problem, shows the removal of humanity in state killings. Anne wasn't just executed. Her death was managed by a system turning human suffering into political messages. Modern records say no English killer would do it, not from morals, but because the French sword needed special training. The blade was sharpened and weighted differently from an English axe, made for a fast sideways cut, not a downward chop. This detail shows the dramatic heart of Anne's death. Even how she died was picked for greatest effect and least mess, ensuring the show went smoothly. After the sword fell, Thomas Wyatt, himself held in the tower and forced to watch the death of a woman he once admired, wrote of the little neck once covered in jewels. His poem captures Anne's awful change from glowing queen to lifeless body. Her head, wrapped in cloth by crying ladies, was shown to the crowd by the killer holding it up by the hair, the usual sign the job was done. This public display, blood still pumping from cut arteries, burned the image into those watching. Tower records suggest Anne's body was buried hastily, Christian rites cut down to almost nothing. Her chest, holding her head and body, went under the chapel floor with other executed nobles. A shameful end for a crowned Queen of England. Anne Boleyn's grave was lost for centuries without a marker, showing the height of Henry's effort to wipe her from life and history. This plan nearly worked. After her death, Henry's spin doctors quickly changed public feeling. Poets who once praised Anne's beauty and mind now wrote verses calling her a sly adulteress. Official records stressed the king's mercy in providing a skilled swordsman instead of the usual way, twisting Henry's dramatic choice as kindness. The execution's horror was cleaned from official papers, starting the long rewrite of history that still changes how we see Anne's end. The quick return to normal life seems shocking today. For Henry VIII, he got engaged to Jane Seymour the day after Anne died, and married his third wife just 2 weeks after quietly sending his second to her death at Whitehall Palace. This speed shows Anne's execution was a handy fix for politics. Failing to have a son, she was thrown away and replaced without seeing her pain or death as tragic. Focus moved to ruling and building the royal line. The mental pain of Anne's execution started before the scaffold. She faced constant questioning, lack of sleep, and isolation from friends in the weeks before death. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's minister who made the charges, used methods much like modern mental torture. Anne faced being alone, sleep loss, mind games, and lies before her execution. By the time she reached the scaffold, her mental strength was worn down to stop any strong final protest. History notes extreme security for Anne's execution, more than usual for high traitors. The tower guards were doubled, extra soldiers were posted throughout the fortress. This wasn't to stop escape, but to block supporters from a last-minute rescue or stirring public anger against the killing. This show of force also scared anyone feeling sorry for Anne into silent obedience. Scheduling the execution for mid-morning, not dawn, meant more Londoners could come. Tower Green held a chosen group of nobles and officials, but its height let outsiders glimpse the outcome. Church bells across London rang at the moment of death, echoing city-wide recognition of the king's power. This plan turned Anne's private agony into public drama. Her death was political theatre, not a personal loss. A rarely mentioned part of Anne's execution is what happened to the others accused. 5 men, including her brother George Boleyn, were beheaded just days before Anne, charged with adultery with the Queen. Their death set the stage for Anne's supposed guilt, removing any chance their last words might contradict the official story. One of Tudor England's boldest acts of state violence, the court-ordered killing of 6 people convicted mostly on fake proof, mirrors the cruelty of Stalin's trials later. Though a memorial at Tower Green marks where Anne supposedly died, history suggests the scaffold was elsewhere in the Tower grounds. This mismatch shows how Anne's death has been reshaped and moved, both in place and story, to fit different views. The clean romantic version of her death in pop culture looks nothing like the mind games, smears, and planned cruelty of her last days in May 1536. Anne Boleyn's execution is terrifying not just for the physical beheading, but because it shows a full effort to destroy a woman who rose too high for Tudor times. She wasn't just killed. Her name was ruined, her work belittled, her life nearly wiped from history. Looking closely at her final days, the mental torture, public disgrace, dramatic staging, and tries to erase her memory reveal a deeper horror than the quick cut of a Calais sword. From a modern mind science view, Anne's execution is a clear case of state-run gaslighting and public character attack. The charges against her, adultery with many men, including her brother, and plots to poison the king, were so wild no modern court would accept them. By skillfully shaping public opinion, using torture to get confessions from others accused, and controlling all official records, Henry's government made many believe Anne deserved her fate. The coldest part of her death might be this planned twisting of truth itself. 500 years later, Anne Boleyn's execution still grips us because it mixes personal tragedy and power politics. Her end wasn't just a life finishing, but a carefully made show meant to make a king's actions seem right, and change how history saw things. The real fear isn't in the falling sword, but in seeing how completely power can change reality, a lesson that echoes darkly today in our world of controlled information and smears. The final sadness for Anne might be that while Henry tried to destroy her, it was her death, not her life, that became her lasting mark. Facing the full horror of Anne Boleyn's execution makes us see hard truths about power, gender, and how history is written. The cleaned-up story of her death, a queen dying quickly and nobly, hides the crushing state force her case shows. Looking at the mental side of her execution, the plan tortures, public shaming, name ruin, and tries to erase her memory, teaches us not just about Tudor law, but how power keeps control by ruling over bodies and stories. In Anne's cut-off head, we see a warning about how fragile truth is against complete power.